Let's now take this one step further and make it a bit more real world or relevant for our situation here at hand, which is the configuration of our server here, server 2. Here in this configuration, maybe we have some IP addressing that we need to worry about. Maybe we have some other configurations like getting it into the domain and so on that take this otherwise unconfigured server and then make it configured, or at least further along the process of making it configured. You can see here that I have a slightly more complex script that I'm using here. All of these scripts will be available in the added content associated with this course. This script is going to request domain credentials and local credentials right here in line 64 and 65, just simply giving you the abilities to punch in what the correct password should be for your domain credentials as well as your local credentials. We also, once again, go through and set up creating the MOF file, which in this case will use a set of configuration data which exists right here in line 50 that we'll use to pre-populate some of the information that we need. All we're really doing here is just storing all the unique information in a single location to make it easy to modify later on. Once we've done that, we will change some of the local configuration manager configurations, so the DSC configurator itself, and then execute this MOF file against this local machine by starting the DSC configuration. I want to kind of go backwards through this configuration to show you exactly what it could potentially accomplish so you have a better appreciation for the kinds of things that a DSC document can provide. Again, everything here in config data is associated with the local machine. We can make this work with other remote machines, but that's a topic for another day. On this local machine and all the nodes that are associated with this local machine, you'll see that we have a lot of data that we've populated here that we are referencing in the above configuration. As I mentioned, the only reason for separating this out into a config data kind of module or code block right here is that so that I could easily change some of the content here if, for example, I wanted a different IP address or a gateway address or a domain name. Now, we're not yet getting to the point where we're actually creating an Active Directory domain controller. This first configure server script, in fact, does not yet install Active Directory domain services. Rather, what it does, if I kind of close some things down here, is it allows us to do some further configuration on this machine. Let's take a look at the different configurations that I've created here in this DSC document. We have what appear to be, looks like 6 of them here. The first being just the configuration of DSC itself, the local configuration manager here local on this machine, and then 5 specific configurations that adjust its IP address, its gateway address, DNS server address, the administrator user, and then also to change the name of the computer and join it to our Active Directory domain. For each of these, we'll skip over the first one for now. For each of these, there will be other keywords that we need to have present in this particular modification, in this configuration item, so that DSC knows exactly what should and should not exist when we tell the computer to become what we're asking. The first here is defining what the IP address should be, right here in line 14, where you can see the reference down here to the information we included there at the bottom. $node.ip address corresponds to the $node information and the IP address information that exists right here in our configuration data code block. So again, all I'm doing is separating out this information because I may be reusing it in the information above. Scrolling back up here, we can see that for our Ethernet 0 interface alias, I'm assuming here obviously that that is the correct interface alias, I want to set the IP address to the one I've configured below with a 24-bit subnet mask and then for my IPv4 address. So very simply here, when I execute this DSC configuration document, I'm going to tell the server to become a machine with this IP address. I can do the same thing over here with the IP gateway, where I set the gateway address to what I've configured below. I can do the same thing also here for my primary DNS client, where I set the primary DNS server to the IP address that's configured below. In this case, you can see that the IP address is actually configured to be the same IP address as the DNS server. So one assumes here in this configuration that perhaps I would be setting this up as a domain controller itself, which in fact I will be here in just a second. In other situations, you might want to set this to the DNS server's IP address as opposed to itself. Down here under the user keyword, I could say for the administrator user, ensure that it's present, that its name is administrator, that its credential is equal to the credential that we've entered in right here. That's our local administrator credential. And that it also depends on, as you can see here, the successful completion of the previous step. For all of these, notice the depends on keyword here refers to the immediately previous configuration that we're attempting to accomplish. You can do this optionally if you want to. It does provide a way to sort of set an order for how these different configurations get applied. First the gateway, then the address, then the IP gateway, then the administrator, and then lastly, once all that's complete, we can use the xcomputer keyword here to go through and change the name to this computer name, and then add it in to the Active Directory domain that we've configured right down here using the correct domain credential that we've configured right here. So all of these present us a way to then further configure this machine towards what it should be to bring a sense of measured and managed configuration control over these servers. As you can imagine, you could reapply this document over and over again, and based off of how you configure it, the document will simply ensure that all those configurations exist, and those that become out of spec will be automatically then brought into specification once that document re-executes here on this server. Now we have to be prepared here anytime we're dealing with DSC to make sure that the correct modules exist on the local machine prior to executing the document. This xcomputer module here is one that isn't natively available right out of the box here with Windows. The same is true over here with xDNS server address and xdefault gateway address. These exist as a component of what we can see right here as the different resources that are necessary. Xcomputer management and xnetworking are the two DSC resources that we need to locate from some other location out on the internet, which contain all the necessary things that we can then add down here at the bottom for configuring these items. Now, in order to do that, back in the old days, the process to do so involved finding them on the internet and then downloading them and making them available here on this local machine. But thankfully, that process has improved somewhat by being able to automatically download them from some repository there on the internet. That ability to do so remotely is baked into Windows Server 2016 here, and by running this prep server script like what you can see here, this will allow us to then reach out over the internet and grab the necessary modules so that we can execute all these configuration changes that we require. The gallery we're looking for is indeed the PS gallery. This PS gallery is one that is available by default there on the machine, and all we're doing here is setting this gallery as a trusted gallery here so that we can download all of these additional modules without having any error messages or warnings. I'll show you down here at the bottom that if we run the get package source command right here, this get package source command will provide us information about the package source locations that are available there on the internet. The one we're attaching to, which is available by default, is the PowerShellGallery.com location right here. And the API we're pointing towards will contain all the necessary information we need to gather and install all the modules from this remote location. Once we've set this package source here to trusted, we then also need to install just a little update here to the package provider, the NuGet package provider. We need a certain minimum version of this package provider to work with Windows Server 2016. I can show you that if I attempt to do the get package provider command here, that will show us information about the package providers currently on this machine. Again, we're straight out of the box here, so this is a native configuration. The package provider that we'll be working with is going to be this NuGet package provider, which will be added here to the list of those you can see. Once we have that package provider here locally, we can use it to find the modules we're looking for from the source through the package provider, and then there to the specific modules that we require. These two modules, xcomputer management and xnetworking, are the ones that contain those keywords like what we are configuring over here in our initial PS1 document. Right here is the place where we actually identify which of those modules that we need to bring down locally in order to provide the necessary bits for, once we tell the computer to be something, actually doing the things that get it there. Let's start this process then by executing this first prep server script so that we can go through making sure all the necessary modules exist here locally on the machine prior to attempting to run the DSC document. If I do /prep server, for example, actually let me go to the right folder here. I'm looking for configure server, and then if I do /prep server.ps1, that will go through the process of setting that package source as trusted, installing the necessary package provider, like what you can see here, and then downloading and installing the modules we're looking for so that we can prepare ourselves to configure this server. This process takes just a second because, again, we're downloading things from some remote location. And then once we're complete, we can then complete this process by executing the document itself. Let me come back over here to my configure server item here, and let's just for grins make sure that we are setting up right here our primary DNS client not equal to the IP address of the machine itself, but rather to the IP address of the actual DNS client that we're looking on pointing towards, which in my case here in this environment is 192.168.3.10. This will be the machine dc.company.pri that I actually have running still here in this environment. And so if I run this now and actually save things here, and then run the configure server script right down here at the bottom, this will allow us to then go ahead and execute then this DSC document against this machine. As we've already discussed, this script requires us to enter in administrator privileges for both the domain and locally. So first being the domain administrator privileges, which there's my password for that, and then secondly for the local administrator. I'll punch that in and allow now the DSC document to complete. This process can take a pretty extensive period of time because we may have quite a bit of different configurations that we need to apply here to this machine. You can see now that after it's completed, we have a couple of error messages here, in part, I believe, because this machine is already in the domain. In fact, yes, this is already in the domain. So we've gone through most of the configurations here, but not all of them, because indeed we've errored out as part of this whole entering this machine into the domain. But notwithstanding our errors here, this should give you some more familiarity with how DSC can be used for managing the configurations here inside of code for how you want your servers to actually exist.